Hey y'all, it's Gabby. Welcome back to my channel. So I'm just gonna be talking about like comedy today as like art, and it's not gonna be like that research or anything. It's just gonna be more my thoughts on it, and especially within the context of Dave Chappelle's recent special, The Closer, on Netflix. And I just kind of got some thoughts, so I just thought might as well make a YouTube video out of them. But without further ado, let's go. So I think that there is nothing off limits with regards to any type of art, because I don't really think that it is a job of any one person to be delineating what experiences can and cannot be expressed and discussed and processed through in art. I'm not really that interested in that kind of a conversation. Nor do I think the claims of even saying what certain topics should not be discussed I just don't think those are valid. For one thing, I don't really know how we would ever discuss altogether what should and should not be artistically understood. Like, I don't even know how we begin to have that kind of conversation. We can't even like follow a simple thread on Twitter. I don't know how we're going to be able to have a cross media platform discussion on this, much less implement it. And two, human beings have a wide variety of experiences, and I'm not really here to say that actually we can talk about these, but this one experience that you have, I don't really think you should talk about it. I don't think you should be using art to discuss it and process it. I think that's honestly kind of gross, to be honest, to police people like that. And I definitely am not really interested in saying what cannot move people and how people want to move people regarding a topic. So yeah, I'm not really that militant on that end at all. So if you want to talk about Nazism, you can. That's fine. If you want to talk about, systemic oppression in whatever way that is, and you want to talk about, something even trivial like getting the wrong drink at Starbucks, whatever it is, you have a right to talk about it. You experienced it. You're allowed to talk about your experiences, and you are allowed to find comedy in those experiences. Honestly, like, life is pretty ridiculous, and it's hard not to find comedy in things. Even in your own traumatic experiences, there can be something there. Maybe, it's not necessarily going to be the most humorous. It could be dark humor, right? But my point is that there's always going to be a way to artistically understand and present a trauma. And I think that's perfectly valid for people to do. And I'm not really here to police people just wanting to do that. And even trying to do that. I'm not going to condemn someone for trying. But what I am going to do, and what I think we should all do, like we do with any kind of film, music, comedy, piece of art, or any kind of self-expression. Like, we obviously are going to find issues with it based on our own experiences and based on what we know. And so for me personally, I found Dave Chappelle's special to be rather limiting and pretty uninspired, if I'm being perfectly frank and honest. I'm sorry, I'm like moving around. Because, I understand that it's frustrating to get a lot of criticism from people, especially when you yourself internally understand you are trying to learn, you are trying to be sympathetic and empathetic with their experiences of trauma. And it's not like you don't care about these people or care about this group's plight at all. And that's something that Dave Chappelle literally echoed in this past special. I can understand how frustrating it is to have your own perception of your actions and your internal processing not be reflected in the criticisms that people are levying at you. That's understandable. You want people to recognize what you're doing, and for some reason people just aren't seeing it. And obviously that would be frustrating. And, I understand being frustrated that people aren't seeing the progress that you've made. Which, okay, I can understand that too. But I don't really think that makes anything what you say, like, free from being criticized. Just because you've made progress does not mean that there isn't more progress to be made. And that's really what people were pointing out in terms of discussing the transphobia that was very apparent in your special, Dave. And it's a little frustrating that you seem to be a lot more concerned about how this is affecting you, and a lot more concerned that people aren't really interested in recognizing all this work that you've done, rather than they are more concerned with the act of harm that you are literally doing to the LGBT plus community, especially to trans people. Like, I'm sorry that people are not being as sympathetic to whatever progress that you've made in trying to understand the trans community, but when you aren't really able to reflect that understanding in your special for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people to see, why are people not allowed to be critical of that? And also, why are you not willing to be critical of yourself and the fact like, oh shit, maybe actually I'm not really expressing myself in the way that I should, or maybe, you know what, I haven't made as much progress as I thought I did. Like, like, be willing to recognize that sometimes, you know, our own self-perception can be wrong. Sometimes when we think that we know everything, that we've done a lot of work, sometimes, honestly, we haven't. Whether that means we're just delusional, whether that means maybe we are a little bit too sympathetic and empathetic to ourselves, or whether maybe we're just afraid to recognize that we've hurt people, I don't really know. But whatever is a barrier to that challenge to our self-perception and our, hopefully, progress and being a better person, I think that we kind of need to get over it and recognize that, you know what, other people do have a right to be critical, and sometimes their criticisms are correct. Not because they're necessarily a part of some marginalized community that gives them some kind of indemnity and whatever they say is correct. That's not true. But rather that, you know what, after hearing their argument and using the evidence that they've levied out to you, I understand the merits of what they're saying because I'm actually willing to listen and understand that they're not just saying things because they hate me, right? They're not just not being critical because they just don't understand what I'm saying. No, I think they understand plain well what they're saying. It's just the context isn't enough to absolve you of your transphobia. And neither is your willingness to be empathetic with people. I'm sorry. Like, if you think that just saying those words is enough to display empathy, then you are just wrong. You actually have to show that with your actions and with your understanding. You can't just say, well, I'm sympathetic to people that are like marginalized and traumatized, and then just go on to shit on them. How much empathy does that really display? And I don't really understand how you think that would be. Like, how would you feel if somebody was saying that about you? Like, I don't understand. Be like, yeah, no, I totally sympathize with Dave Chappelle. Like, I totally get it. I totally get his plight as a black man. But actually, you know, like, you know what I mean? Like, what? Like, I don't understand how that could all just go over your mind. Oh, yeah, I know. Like, it's because you have a huge ego and you are completely unwilling to recognize when you're wrong. Because how can you be wrong? I'm not necessarily even talking to Dave Chappelle here, but it's like, I understand how hard it is to recognize, like, you know what, you fucked up. And you know what, maybe you're not as great or as thoughtful as you thought you were. But I don't have as much of an ego, and I can recognize, like, I'm actually more concerned about hurting people than whatever hurt to my ego I'm going to get by recognizing that I'm not as good as I thought I was. I'm more concerned about my actions going forward when presented with criticisms that are actually, you know, criticism that makes sense. Sometimes people don't always make sense, but regardless, like, you should be willing to at least hear people out and at least try to understand their perspective and understand their criticisms and strawman it as much as you can and really try to be like, okay, what is it about my actions have led to this? And you could come to the conclusion after talking to a lot of people, like, you know what, maybe it's not as bad as they're saying, but I recognize that there is some kind of work to be done. Like, you don't have to go the full Monty and make it seem like you're this raging, hateful transphobe. Like, I don't necessarily think you need to do that. But you can recognize how your rhetoric is not necessarily the most helpful, even if that may not necessarily be representative of your intentions. Like, there is a way to bridge the gap between your understanding of yourself and the fact that your actions don't necessarily reflect that understanding. It doesn't mean you're a horrible person. It just means that you are doing bad things, and you can do things that are better and better reflect your understanding of yourself. I think that's entirely possible, and why you're unwilling to do that, I think it's just because you have really huge ego, and you're not really willing to recognize, like, just because you did some really good work, like, 20, 30 years ago in your specials and in your Chappelle Show, it doesn't really absolve you from anything you're doing now. And, like, come on, you're 48, you're an adult. You've been an adult for quite some time, and I don't really think that you can just ride on the coattails of this, just being a community you don't really understand, when you apparently had a trans friend that you were really concerned about, which, by the way, I thought was really gross for you to weaponize in this special, and yet you still aren't really willing to recognize, like, one, Daphne is just one person, and two, maybe talk to other trans people in general, because just having one person that you can throw out as a token doesn't really mean that you're that willing to engage with that community, nor does it really mean that you're willing to humanize them either. So all in all, like, pretty disappointed in that special, and there's just kind of, I think, an affront to comedy. Comedy should, one, make you laugh, and just because people are laughing doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually that funny. But regardless, like, what I'm saying is that, you had an opportunity to challenge people. You had an opportunity to really show your perspective on things, and honestly, you really didn't. I mean, I understood your perspective through innuendo, but it was just more all of this window dressing to just basically imply that, what, I don't like it when people criticize me. And I don't like that it's coming from Twitter. And I don't really like that people, and through their criticism of me, in my own perception, are disregarding all the other work that I've done. And why should I care about these people? That's really all that you are trying to say throughout this entire special. But you just dressed it up in some kind of righteous grievance of, like, well, white gay people, like, they're not always, they're racist. You're like, great, obvious. People in the LGBT community, I've been saying that for literally ever. So thanks for saying something completely unoriginal. And also, dude, what? Like, you do realize, like, queer people of color exist, right? Do you understand that? Like, do you get that? Because I don't think you get that. I think you think they're literally separate, making it seem like, oh, white, like, you literally implied, like, oh, white people weren't really getting oppressed. They're like, let's just become trans. Like, come on. Like, first off, hardly anyone is really going to be using their gender identity or sexuality to be like, actually, you know what? I know I'm white, but I'm a lesbian. So you can't really say anything back to me. Like, I have seen people do that on Twitter. Okay, I know they exist. But to paint it as some kind of, one, this huge problem that we really need to be aware of, and two, to make it seem like it is this nefarious intent upon a huge swath of the community that they would weaponize identity like that on such a wide scale that you decide to talk about it on your special to, like, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, is absurd. It is a straw man. That is not what majority of, like LGBT people are doing. They're just trying to live their fucking lives, man. And plenty of LGBT people are conservative. Plenty of them have had their own issues with, like, accepting other members of that community. So as if somehow they're not going to have any issues. It's just a racial thing. I don't know. Like, God, you don't really understand, like, what these communities are going through, or, like, what any of the real critiques that members of the community are making. And to kind of insert yourself into this conversation as if you do is honestly really... that took some big cojones there that you really did not have for this. But honestly, like, whatever. Like, he's gonna make money regardless. So, like, he'll be fine. But I'm more concerned about, like, the ideas that he's perpetuating to his audience. And this audience, I hope, would be willing to be more critical of. But so far, I'm seeing a lot of people just being needlessly defensive of his special. And for what? First off, what is this guy What has he really done for you that he deserves to be completely insulated from any type of criticism? I don't think anybody, regardless how much they've done for you, like, they don't deserve that. Like, not even my parents deserve that, okay? I love them. I respect the shit out of them. They're my best friends. And they're the best parents I could ever ask for. But does that mean they are completely immune from criticism and doing bad things? No, they are not. So I'm going to be calling them out all day if they're doing things bad all day. I'm not just going to be a contrarian. But my point is, regardless of how much I respect somebody, regardless how much I care about them, and regardless how much they've done for me, that does not make them immune from any type of things that could be bad, right? And it definitely doesn't mean that they can't hurt me. They can hurt me. They can hurt my feelings. And they can perpetuate narratives that I think are harmful. And I think it's perfectly fine to call them out, because at the end of the day, I do think it is more caring and kind to call somebody out and hopefully call them in enough where they'll hear you and hopefully change their actions, than just allow them to perpetuate this stuff to other people and hurt other people because you're just so unwilling to deal with any type of conflict. You know, like, conflict isn't inherently bad. And I do think we should be more willing to engage with it rather than just assuming that it's just going to go nowhere. And if you're really that unwilling to listen to criticism, that's a you problem. That's not really the criticism's fault. Now, granted, I understand, like, some people kind of went into the criticism a little hot and heavy, and maybe they shouldn't have done that. Maybe if they really wanted to call in Dave Chappelle and make him more willing to listen, like, maybe there are ways to do it better. But also, Dave Chappelle, you need to be willing to, like, actually listen. You know, the only way that people actually change is when they recognize that there is a problem and they're in a place to hear people out. If you're not really in a place to do that, why would you change? Why would you even be willing to recognize that these people have a point? So I don't really see him changing anytime soon. And that's disappointing. But also, you know, maybe we shouldn't listen to him anymore unless he actually has a change in opinion and change of perspective. Because otherwise, I don't really understand what the point is in hearing yet another transphobic and completely, a completely ununderstanding and unknowledgeable person about these issues. Like, why even pay attention to him when he doesn't really know what he's talking about? That's more my thing. Like, you can talk about your own experiences all you want, but don't project that onto everybody else as if that's somehow, one, a universal experience, and let me tell you, it is not. And two, don't make it seem like your issues are somehow problems that are like a universal problem that we really all have to deal with. Like, no, we don't. And this is just a you problem. It's not really an us problem, okay? And sometimes, you know what, like, as an aside, like, I don't really think it's that, like, cute to just say things to be provocative. Like, and in this special, he was like, oh, I'm in trouble now. I was like, dude, you obviously haven't really considered any of the criticism that people have been levying at you, if that is going to be a reaction. Or maybe you did at one point and it just completely went out the window when you're like, oh my God, cancel culture is coming to get me. Yeah. It's like, you sound like a whiny child. So, oh well. But yeah, those are my thoughts on that. Like, TLDR, you can talk about whatever you want, but that doesn't mean people can't be critical of how you're discussing it. And maybe you should discuss things that you have more knowledge about and be a little bit more humble in recognizing that, rather than just dismissing anybody trying to correct you. And criticism is not abusive and toxic inherently. It is something that I think is really important for any of us to have and to grow and to be better people for ourselves and to be better people for those around us and to be the best at actually enacting social change for the future. And to be that hostile to it not only means that you have a huge ego and you're very completely unwilling to recognize that you've harmed people and are just so uncomfortable with any of your ego at all being tarnished, like, you really just aren't that caring about the issues that you purport to care about. You're not a feminist, Dave Chappelle. And honestly, I don't ever think you were. So, all right, so that's my video. I hope you have a wonderful day. Drink water. Water is really important. Go outside if it's not rainy and gross. I mean, you can, well, okay, you can do whatever you want. Like, make your own choices. It was just like really rainy here, and I hate the rain, so I'm not going to go out in it. But go out and enjoy the outside if you can go outside, and or, you know, watch a cute video of cats being cute. I went down a rabbit hole of watching really funny cat videos and cat TikToks. My world is forever changed. But yeah, I hope you're all doing okay. Comment down below what other things you want me to talk about, and just, you know, yeah, I hope you're all doing good. I love y'all. Peace.